Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about something that sounds a little technical, but I promise you its impact is huge. We're breaking down how a single update to a core fraud auditing standard, ISA 240, has literally sent waves across the entire world of auditing. It's a real game changer. So you might be asking yourself, how can one rule change really change everything? Well, it all starts with a simple idea. In a complex system like global auditing standards, no rule is an island. When you change a fundamental piece, especially one that deals with something as critical as fraud, everything connected to it has to adapt. Here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the initial splash, the why behind all these changes. Then, we'll see how it sharpens an auditor's mindset, makes them dig deeper into risk, changes how they talk about their findings, and ultimately redraws the whole audit landscape. All right, let's dive into Section 1. How does one change actually manage to spread so far and wide? What's the mechanism here? It all starts right here. This is the epicenter of the earthquake, ISA 240. This is the rulebook that tells auditors what their job is when it comes to sniffing out fraud in a company's financials. And when you change something this central, well, you've got to make sure the rest of the rulebook still makes sense. And this whole process has a name. It's called Conforming amendments. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like a massive find and replace in a giant document. The rulemakers literally have to comb through every single other standard and update any language that connects back to ISA 240, just to make sure the entire system is still in sync. And I mean, just look at the scale of this. It's staggering. We're not talking about a couple of minor tweaks here and there. These changes touch everything from an auditor's high-level goals to how they assess risk, how they gather evidence, and even down to the specific words they have to use in the final audit report. Okay, so what's the first big ripple? It is all about sharpening what auditors call professional skepticism. It's basically about forcing a mindset shift from trust but verify to something more like question everything, especially when it comes to potential fraud. This right here is a really crucial clarification. The rules are now way more explicit. They say that if an auditor has any doubt, any little red flag that hints at fraud, they have a professional duty to dig deeper. Just accepting a document at face value isn't going to cut it anymore. And look at this shift in language. It's so important. Before, the wording was kind of soft, talking about possible bias. But now, it's much more direct. It explicitly connects that bias to the risk of material misstatement due to fraud. It forces the auditor to connect the dots between a dodgy-looking estimate and the real possibility of deliberate manipulation. So this isn't just theory. It's being hardwired into everyday audit work. Auditors are now pushed to actively question if documents are real, to see a non-response from a bank not as a hassle, but as a potential fraud risk, and to pay extra attention to related party dealings where fraud can be easier to hide. All right, next up. This whole thing builds, right? It's not just about the mindset. The actual process of assessing risk has been fundamentally changed to put fraud front and center from the get-go. This might look like a boring quote, but trust me, it is a huge deal. The very definition of inherent risk, that's the baseline risk before you even think about controls, now officially includes a company's vulnerability to management bias and fraud. This puts fraud at the absolute heart of the risk assessment. It's no longer a side quest. And this table just lays it out so clearly. Now, the very first team meeting has to talk about where fraud could be hiding. Procedures for looking at related parties are now explicitly about fraud risk. And I love this last one. Auditors are now encouraged to be unpredictable, to perform procedures at odd times, basically to keep management on their toes. So, it makes sense, right? If you're being asked to find more, you also have to say more. The next big ripple is a major expansion of an auditor's duty to communicate what they find, making things way more transparent for everyone involved. And the rules are getting super specific to make sure this happens. In the standard about audit documentation, all the requirements for what to write down about fraud, which used to be scattered all over the place, are now pulled together into one new single paragraph, paragraph 68. It's a central, crystal clear checklist for what needs to be recorded. And look at this. The old ambiguity is gone. Auditors now have a clear mandate to report not just fraud they've actually found, but also suspected fraud, and pretty much anything else they think is relevant. They have to tell the people at the very top of the organization, the board, the audit committee, what's going on. Now, this is probably the biggest change for the public. For you and me, this exact phrase, or something really close to it, is now part of the standard auditor's report that's published for everyone to see. It makes the auditor's role on fraud completely transparent to all stakeholders. No more hiding. And for big global companies, this transparency is critical. The rules make sure that if fraud is found in a subsidiary in one country, that information can't just get stuck in a silo. It has to be reported all the way up the chain to the main group auditor. Okay, let's pull all these threads together. Let's zoom out. What does this new world actually look like for the auditors on the ground who have to put all these changes into practice? You can really think of it like this. These ripples from ISA 240 have created 4 new pillars for the modern audit. First, skepticism is now the default setting. Second, risk assessment is deeper, with fraud baked right in. Third, communication is direct and mandatory. And fourth, documentation is centralized and clear. It's a complete holistic shift. So this leaves us with one big final question. The rules of the game have been completely rewritten to create a stronger, more fraud-aware, and more transparent audit process. The whole system has been upgraded. But the real question is, will this fundamental shift in the process actually lead to a fundamental shift in the outcomes? Well, that's what we'll all be watching.